Last week, I talked about the data that suggests lead may be partially to blame for the rise in violent crime in the 1990s, and its removal from our environment may be partially to blame for the subsequent drop in crime. If you don't feel like watching that video, I will sum it up like this. Lead is without a doubt very, very bad for humans, especially for young children, but crime is a complicated subject, so we can only say that there's very good evidence that lead contributed somewhat to that 1990s crime wave. And some of the research suggests that it really did have quite a large impact on that crime wave. In response to that video, a whole lot of you wanted me to know that instead of or in addition to the lead hypothesis, abortion is to blame for the 1990s crime statistics. Like, this is very clearly an idea that has caught on amongst the general public, which I totally get. You know, it's a tidy explanation that will make people at a party think you're very clever and interesting when you bring it up. Also, you know, it appeared in a wildly popular mainstream pop science book that presents it as a fact with a lot of evidence behind it. So I wanted to just make this follow-up video to inform you that the abortion crime hypothesis is not as well supported as many of you seem to believe. I also think it's worth noting that the wildly popular book that it appeared in, Freakonomics, is overall pretty dodgy when it comes to actual science. They get some things right, they get a lot of stuff wrong. And by the way, yes, this is another video about economics. I'm really like in my economics era, aren't I? What an incredibly boring era to be in. Anyway, in 2001, economist Stephen Levitt and law professor John J. Donahue III wrote an article arguing that Roe v. Wade, aka, you know, the legalization of abortion in the United States, was responsible for a full 50% of the reduction in crime in the 1990s. The idea is this: in 1970, 5 U.S. states legalized abortion. In 1973, Roe v. Wade extended this to the rest of the country. Approximately 20 years later, crime dropped, first in those 5 states and then a few years later in the rest of the U.S. Levitt and Donahue argue that this is a causal relationship, explaining that women now aborted unwanted fetuses. Unwanted fetuses would become unwanted babies who would have fewer resources and experience worse health outcomes than wanted babies, meaning that those unwanted babies become adult criminals about 20 years later. Legalized abortion deleted that risky population, and thus 20 years later, we reap the benefits of Roe v. Wade with lower crime. While that article was published in 2001, Levitt would then go on to popularize this study in 2005 with his book Freakonomics, written with New York Times journalist Stephen J. Dubner. Now, over the years, there have been a number of problems experts have brought up about this study. I'm just going to flag a few of the big ones. But the first thing you should be skeptical of is an effect size. You know, up to 50% of the reduction in violent crime is due to this one cause 20 years earlier. If you'll recall, you know, there's a lot of very good data that suggests that maybe lead contributes somewhere from 7 to 28% of the drop in homicides. And that's a lot. Some economists dropping one paper on the topic suggesting that their pet hypothesis is responsible for fully half of the drop is ridiculous. And by the way, they don't think the other half, they didn't even mention lead. They had some other ideas about why crime dropped in other ways. Second of all, that paper did have some data issues. In 2005, some other economists discovered a computational error in Levitt and Donahue's paper that artificially inflated the effect size, which Levitt and Donahue acknowledged they got that wrong. But then they said that if they did some other statistical tweaking, that resulted in results that were just as strong, if not stronger, than their original paper. So there. This is just one example of a pretty exhausting back and forth between various researchers arguing over how to crunch the data to get a true representation of reality. As Mark Twain famously quipped, there are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. This is very messy data, and unlike the data on lead, it seems like there's a lot more wiggle room to play around with statistical analyses in ways that you might just end up with the results that you want. There are also some inconvenient facts that Levitt forgets about or hand waves away. And by the way, I'm just going to refer to Levitt from here on out for simplicity's sake, since he's the one who both co-authored the original paper and then co-authored the book. So, for instance, if the decrease in violent crime was due to the population of wanted babies born after 1973 coming of age, we would expect the crime statistics to first decrease in that youngest adult population, and then following that population as they age up. But instead, the data actually shows the reverse. Violent crime decreased in older populations first, and then seemed to work its way down to younger populations. And arguments like this are honestly why I can't understand why Levitt doesn't just throw his hands in the air and admit, okay, maybe abortion legalization isn't responsible for half of this decrease. Because if, for example, he argued that it explains 7 to 28%, like the lead hypothesis, then you can say, well, other factors are the reason why the age-related data skews that way. And you can point to the many other reasons why experts think crime dropped, like the crack epidemic ending, or new strategies of policing, or new advances in medical interventions that result in fewer people dying. Like, okay, that's why older populations are seeing crime go down before the younger population. It doesn't explain half of it, but it explains a significant amount. That would also address some other common problems that have been brought up, like how this relationship between abortion and crime doesn't really tend to show up in any other countries that have changed their abortion laws. In Freakonomics, they argue that it does, but the actual data is at best really, really messy, and at worst directly contradicts them. Some studies find some effect, maybe, in some countries. Many other studies find nothing, like this 2007 study of 7 European countries that found it was demographics and incarceration rates and not the legality of abortion that explained crime rates. So there are a lot of issues with this abortion crime hypothesis, but one I rarely see brought up is the fact that there is a good chance that Levitt based this entire idea on an initial premise that simply is not true, that legalizing abortion drastically altered the number of abortions women get. Levitt calls this true virtually by definition. It is not. This is a point that I have brought up many times before, so I'm sorry if you're a frequent watcher of this channel and you're seeing this for the 8,000th time. But we have a lot of data suggesting that restricting access to abortion doesn't actually change the number of fetuses that are being aborted significantly. All it really changes is the number of women who are dying trying to get the abortion. For instance, in 2017, the Guttmacher Institute published a report that found that abortions occur as frequently in the two most restrictive categories of countries, banned outright or allowed only to save a woman's life, as in the least restrictive category, allowed without restriction as to reason. Meanwhile, the percentage of unsafe abortions was 1% in those least restrictive countries, but 28% in the most restrictive. Outlawing abortion means women will still get abortions, they're just going to do it in unsafe ways. We don't have perfect data for the number of abortions performed prior to Roe v. Wade due to the overwhelming number of home abortions combined with the stigma that would limit self-reporting. But the data we do have shows that abortions were extremely common, as detailed in a 2008 paper by Dr. Kay Gleason of Macquarie University. Legalizing abortion in the 1970s in the United States did not necessarily affect the birth rate here, but you know what did? The invention of oral contraception in the 1960s, which, as I discussed in my video about Nobel Prize-winning economist Claudia Goldin, absolutely prevented unwanted births and drastically changed life for the better, thanks to enabling women to have control over their lives, to delay marriage, to complete schooling, to enter the workforce, and to have children when they were ready to have children. But for some reason, Freakonomics ignores all of that. For a hypothesis that is ostensibly based upon women's actions, women's own motivations and our known history of what women actually did with their lives, all of that information is curiously absent from this hypothesis. So, was the legalization of abortion responsible for 50% of the drop in crime in the 1990s? No, absolutely not. Don't be ridiculous. But if you would like to argue that it might have made some difference, then I certainly would not tell you that you're definitely wrong. I would just expect you to have the equivalent amount of extraordinary evidence to support an extraordinary claim that has a lot of data going against it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.